Welcome you, and we thank you for coming to attend today because we want to use these lunch and learn sessions to clarify and educate on anything that's related to assistive technology and home modification or vehicle modification. So in the past, we have seen some assistive technology providers come on board to kind of give a little more detail about the functions that they provide or the processes and systems they use. And so we wanted to open that up to our EAA providers as well. So today we have Christian Hill, who is with us from Thrive Homes, and they are a contracted EAA provider. And he's going to go through and talk about some of the home modifications that they have completed within their areas, some of the options that are available out there, as well as talk about some of the processes that they follow to ensure that they have a successful completion for all those jobs. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Christian. And as always, we will try to answer some questions at the end as able, or we'll follow up with our program. So Christian, it's all yours.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Shelley. And thank you again for the time to be able to speak today to everyone. And I hope you all find it useful and hopefully enjoyable as well. So as Shelley said, we are an EAA provider in Missouri, and we're also a provider in Kansas too, but obviously we're going to be talking about things that are specific to Missouri today. A little bit more about me and my business partner, if you hadn't heard just a second ago, who is overseas right now, having a great time, so he is not going to be able to be on the call, but a little bit more about myself. I come from the HCBS world. I've been in the space for a really long time, previously in a past life on the not-for-profit side, specific to CDS services or consumer-directed services, so personal care and home health and things of that nature. I dabbled briefly in medical equipment, but nevertheless have spent my entire career in that space. I then had a brief stint in the for-profit sector, working for an investor's portfolio companies, kind of doing some finance and admin stuff for him, and then opened up Thrive Homes, and have ever since been trying to just continue to grow our services and grow our organization. So a little bit about Thrive. We were founded initially back in 2020. We became Kansas Medicaid credentialed first, and it took us a little while to get our paperwork done to become a provider. Then in 2022, we became a Missouri Medicaid provider as well. So a little bit about why we founded Thrive and kind of what's on the horizon looking forward. And a lot of people are aware of this, but by 2030, we're going to have, for the first time in history, more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18. And so our organization, we founded the organization primarily to start providing services for those individuals, and not just the individuals who are aging in place, but also people with intellectual and physical disabilities as well. And so the goal with Thrive is to essentially just provide all of the services necessary to keep someone in their home and keep them aging in place before it's kind of too late. And I think there will be a lot of providers that pop up over the next decade, kind of filling the needs and filling the gaps here. But that's kind of what we started Thrive for, and why we do what we do every day. So once that happens, and there's a lot of organizations and state organizations and private organizations, a bunch of people getting together to try to determine how to get ahead of a lot of these issues specific to the caregiving space and then the home remodeling space. And with the labor shortages that have gone on traditionally in the past, that's one kind of competitive edge that we have, is we always try to keep our staff pretty large so that we can get the modifications done as quickly as possible once we do get them. But one thing that we are noticing as well is that even though there's still a shortage in the caregiving space, the home remodeling space and the kind of the contractor and construction world has been a little different recently due to the rising inflation and the interest rates. The new construction and just construction generally is not as busy as it was, during COVID, when people had, funds to spend on bathroom models and things of that nature. So we're actually noticing things kind of loosening up a little bit in the labor market, and hopefully that will be a benefit to other organizations outside of just ours with their turnaround times. So diving in a little more specifically about where we can reach right now. So we are a Kansas City based provider, and so with that said, we can kind of go out into mostly central Missouri. We actually have a job going on right now south of Joplin. So in a case, in instances like that, every now and then we will kind of go outside of the service area, but this is kind of the one we like to go off of. And we use the EMS regions because those are kind of clearly defined, and I know they're used in a couple of different organizations as well to break out different regions of Missouri. But suffice it to say that pretty much anything west of Columbia and north of Joplin, we should be able to get to. So kind of in that western, northwestern part of the state. So talking a little bit more about the process specifically, and a lot of you are probably already aware of this, but I'd be remiss if I didn't just touch on it briefly. So this is the process for the EAA service flowchart from request through to approval. And I won't go dive into all the intricacies of this flowchart specifically, but this is available online, and I'm sure it could be distributed again if you don't have a copy of it. We also send these out a lot of times whenever we get someone reaching out to us, whether it's a service coordinator with a targeted case management organization or otherwise. We kind of have this on hand that we can provide it and give it as a resource. But the way that we kind of suffice it to say is everything starts kind of with the occupational therapy assessment. From there, the occupational therapist will make recommendations for either a home modification that's necessary, a piece of medical equipment or supplies, and then any assistive technology that's needed as well. So everything kind of starts from that occupational therapy assessment and then flows down from there. And then following the occupational therapy assessment, we then go through to, like I said a second ago, home modifications and things of that nature. We actually do at Thrive provide occupational therapy assessments. That's a relatively new thing that we just started doing recently. And we perform those primarily through telehealth. However, we also can do in person if necessary. So if there is a case that you're not for sure if they need an occupational therapy assessment, or if maybe you can't find one or whatnot, reach out to us. If there isn't one on file, we can queue it up. Or if you already have an occupational therapy assessment and you need some medical equipment or a home modification, feel free to send that over to us as well, and we'll kind of go from there. So once we get a request, if an occupational therapy assessment is needed, once we get that request, we try to return it within about 2 weeks. Since it is a newer service that we're adding, we're still working through our process a little bit to get the turnaround time shorter. But nevertheless, like I said, send it over. We can get it taken care of. As far as the home modifications go, once we get an occupational therapy assessment completed, or once one is sent over to us, we try to get a bid turned around within about 14 days from the date of the request. That can, be sometimes quicker if we have something, another bid maybe in the same area, or if we have a job in the same area. But we try to keep them within about 2 weeks. Following the bid and then kind of going back to the flow chart for a second, once the bid is provided, then it goes to the UDAT committee for review, and there may be a second contractor bid required at that point too. And then, once it's approved and sent back to us, we then turn around and get the job scheduled to get completed. The timeline will vary pretty, drastically depending on what it is we're doing, and we'll talk about timelines here later on in the presentation. But we try to keep it to about 3 to 5 weeks, and that also, again, depends primarily on materials and then also how many jobs we have scheduled at that time. But yeah, so I know there's a lot of complexity with this process, and for those of you who don't work, and I was just talking with a service coordinator last night actually, and she hadn't had an EAA request in quite a while. So in the event that you do get one, I know that this is not the primary thing that y'all do, and this is kind of a minor part of what you do. So as you have questions, we invite you. We'll have our contact information at the end of the PowerPoint. If you have questions, this is what we do every day, all day, every day. So we're, kind of subject matter experts on the space, or, we can answer a lot of questions, whether it's something that we provide or something that we need to refer off to another provider to provide. We're happy to just be here as a resource and kind of walk you through the process wherever you may be at inside of this part of the flow chart. So once we submit our bid, generally it takes a few weeks, like I said a minute ago, to get the second bid, and then to, sometimes there's questions that will come back. We may need to clarify part of the bid and resubmit it. But generally, and I'm not going to speak necessarily to exactly what the UDAT team's turnaround time is, but I think they said they try to keep it to about 3 to 4 weeks. But once we send off our bid, we're going to follow up proactively with the service coordinator and potentially with UDAT if necessary. So just know, once you reach out to us, we've got a system to ensure that we constantly follow back up on it. And I kind of covered a couple of these points already. But I guess one point that I didn't is, if we do lose the bid and you're made aware of that, just let us know and we'll take it off our list and we'll stop following back up on you. But generally, we'll follow up once we submit the bid initially, about every 3 to 4 weeks. Also, like I said a minute ago, we're pretty caught up right now. We're at about 4 to 6 weeks right now on our turnaround once the job is approved on getting it scheduled for completion. Next is a couple of just kind of high level things to mention regarding the program, and this is also in the service manual as well. But on the EAAs, the home modifications, there's a $20,000 cap on those funds, and if you weren't made aware of that, that was a recent change that allowed us to lump 2 years worth of the $10,000 cap funding into 1 year. And that's been very helpful to allow us to do some of those larger jobs that may have both a bathroom remodel and a wheelchair ramp or a doorway widening and a couple of other things like that. Additionally, on the medical equipment, that's a separate bucket of funding, and I wanted to make a point of that because I've had a few people ask me about that recently. And the $7,500 is kind of the initial threshold that doesn't require additional approval. Anything over $7,500 would require an approval up to $10,000 worth of funding, and that's a renewing annual funding as well for the medical equipment. And on the home modifications, that is for 2 years worth of funding. So if we exhaust all of those funds, there will be additional funds in the future. It's not a one-time funding. Also, there were some questions about medical equipment and what the difference is between medical equipment and home modifications. Usually it's specific to ramps. And the way that we and this is not a clearly defined maybe a specifically defined definition, but what we kind of like to say is, if it's mounted to the home or if it's like not movable, so if it's a bathroom modification or like a shower as an example, that would be a home modification. But if it's something that could be removed and carried around, like a wheelchair ramp as an example that folds out, that would fall under the medical equipment. So I guess just to clearly define that again, if it's something that's like mounted and affixed to the home, it's a home modification. If it's something that can be picked up and moved to a different side of the home, like one of those foldable wheelchair ramps, that would be medical equipment. So wanted to provide some background on that too. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit about covered versus non-covered services. We get questions on this quite a bit, and so I wanted to kind of drop anchor here for a second and talk about some of the differences between things that are covered and things that are not covered. Medicaid, obviously, as we all know, is the payer of last resort. After it's determined the member can't pay for this out of pocket, or there's not another funding source available that can cover this. In Kansas, it's a little different. They're required to go, and I'd need to ask Shelley if this is the case on the Missouri side as well, but the Kansas side, at least, everyone's required to go search for community funding first. And I don't think that's required in Missouri, but still, once the kind of general funding sources have been exhausted, that's when we're going to look to Medicaid to, fill the gaps here. And Medicaid is going to cover things that are medically necessary and are not going to be covering things that are like cosmetic. One kind of commonly asked about cosmetic item would be things like flooring. So wood flooring is throughout the house. It's not going to be something that's covered. And then things that are not builder grade materials, and I've got an example of that we'll touch on here in a second, are not going to be covered as well. And things that they will cover, things that Medicaid will cover are things that are going to be medically necessary and things that are builder grade. And so one distinction between that is that just because it's builder grade does not mean it's not durable or it doesn't look good. It just means it's not going to be kind of those premium finished items. And so a lot of times individuals especially if there was a picture included potentially on like an occupational therapy report or something, or if they see it online when they Google an example of a zero barrier shower or something along those lines. They may get an idea of this is the, this is what I'm going to be getting, but then that's not really the case. So here's an example of that. So on the left-hand side, these are both bathrooms that we have done at Thrive, but on the left-hand side, we'll see the builder grade example. This is, again, it's still a good looking shower. It's just not, the black finishes and the sliding glass door and the, premium type of shower head and things of that nature. So that's going to be an example of something that's a little more premium. Whereas on the left-hand side, this is going to be something that's just builder grade. It's quality. There's still stainless, appliances and things, or fixtures, but they're just not going to be, quite as premium as the non-builder grade side. So just an example of that to keep in mind if members are ever asking you or if they have a question or something along those lines. So a little bit more about, and I've touched on this already, but a little more about what our services are. We kind of wanted to dive into some examples of pictures that we've done, and then also provide some turnaround times and things of that nature just to keep in mind as you're having conversations with families, or if you just need as a point of reference. So one thing that's not on this list is the occupational therapy assessments. We did just add that pretty recently. So if you have a need for one, like I said, send us a request and we can talk about that. But outside of that, we're really specialists in the whole accessible remodeling space. But we do a lot of bathroom remodels. That seems to be kind of the one area that there's a lot of need in. But we can provide the bathroom remodels. We can do grab bars, ADA toilet installations, zero and low barrier showers, doorway widenings, stair lift, vertical platform lifts, and then the wheelchair ramps. And then the final component would be the medical equipment and supplies. So we can also provide that if there's and we'll go into some examples here in a minute, but wheelchairs, hospital beds, anything of that nature, as well as, the actual supplies too, we can provide. So here's an example kind of an accessible bathroom that we've done. Our lead time from job approval to completion is about 5 weeks right now. We're on the kind of the tail or the higher end of our turnarounds because we've got booked out pretty far. But this is both of these are pictures of bathrooms that we've redone. Very simple, very in and out. And yeah, we can usually, if it's a low barrier, we can usually get it done within 1 day. If it's a zero barrier, it usually takes 2 to 3 days because we've got to do a bit more work. And then obviously this is all just an estimate, but wanted to give you all a turnaround time or kind of like an example of how long that will take once we do get once we do go on site to complete it. This is another example of kind of a before and after, just to show the capabilities of some of the things that we can do, and just to keep this in mind. So if you'll notice here, we actually took the wall out here and then moved it over a couple of feet to make more room inside of the bathroom. So in the event that, there's this tiny bathroom, we do have the capability to kind of extend this wall out and make some more room in the bathroom to make it more accessible. But one note on that is that this wall here is not an exterior facing wall. So we're not actually adding any square footage to the home. We're just going into another room and taking some square footage from, I think it was the living room on the other side of this, and adding it into this. So Medicaid will not cover the addition of more square footage onto the home, but they, in this case, obviously would cover us extending the room out a little bit to the left or, into this direction and taking from another room, as long as it's not, adding an addition onto the house. Another point too is that we can add in a bathroom in an area there isn't a bathroom. So if we get a lot of times in multi-level homes, if there is not a bathroom on the main level, what we can do is we can go into like a half bath and then bust out the wall, add in, kind of reframe off the wall and add in a shower. So just know that even if there isn't a bathroom on the level that one is needed, we can add it in regardless of if there's one there or not. But this is, kind of a simple example here. And then also this next one here, where we can just rip out a bathtub and put in a roll-in shower pretty easily. The other thing that's pretty common is our doorway widenings. Most of the, I mean, we get these every single day. These are requested because, homes that were, initially built weren't built with universal design or universal design ready in mind. And so a lot of doorways are not going to accommodate a wheelchair going through them. But we can do these pretty easily. What we like to do is, especially when we're widening this out to like a 36-inch ADA door, so we like to put in a barn door here that slides out of the way, just to ensure that we're making, the best use of the space, and that, we don't have a massive door kind of swinging out and taking up more room into a hallway or something like that, or a bedroom. We can also put in regular doors as well, but again, we prefer to stick to kind of barn doors. Wooden wheelchair ramps is another thing. We try to avoid using these on exterior homes, just because they're not as cost effective as aluminum wheelchair ramps. But whenever it comes to things like a garage, in this pictured case here, they're pretty easy to add in and get done. And we like to do these inside of garages, with the wooden ramps inside of garages. But exterior, we like to do aluminum. So just some of the kind of pros and cons with these. Wooden ramps are generally more expensive than aluminum ramps. They also can't be deconstructed and moved. And then they also have to be done on warm days. So in our bipolar weather that we were talking about before the beginning of the call, or the beginning of the call, it makes it difficult, to get the weather just right sometimes, to get the concrete poured and get everything done. The other component to this is that, and one of the reasons why it's more expensive, is it just takes a lot longer to install a wooden ramp than it does an aluminum ramp. So that's not to say we can't do a wooden ramp. We certainly can, but we prefer to do aluminum ramps when possible. So here's an example of kind of a before and after of a wooden ramp that we installed. It looks great, but again, there was a lot of work to get this this ramp installed, versus, I'll show you another example here on our next slide of an aluminum ramp. This was a one-day job, and almost every single aluminum wheelchair ramp is going to be cheaper than the wooden ramps, just given the fact that they are just one day worth of labor. And the lead time is generally pretty quick too. They're all custom made to order. So we go out in our bid process and take a bunch of measurements, and we have a system that tells us exactly what we're going to need down to the screw. So that allows us, when we get on site, to be able to rapidly construct it and kind of move on. Another component to this too that I wanted to point out, and I touched on a second ago, as far as it being able to be removed and either repurposed in a different part of the house or taken to a new residence if needed. But the other component is they're actually, this is surprising, but they're actually they have better grip on the surface of it than a wooden ramp does. They're less slick. And that's because there's ridges and everything inside of the walking area that actually pull away water, especially in the colder months when it freezes. They're significantly more durable, so they're going to last a lot longer, and they're also they have a lot more grip on them, versus like a wooden ramp, which as soon as it gets wet and it gets remotely cold, it's going to become very slick. So that's another consideration to keep in mind as well, especially if an individual is going to be walking on it versus being in a wheelchair. They're quite a bit safer than a wooden ramp is. I think I touched on all the points on this, but yeah, that's pretty much it for the aluminum ramps. One other important note too is for the most part, we will do a wooden ramp inside of a garage, but in the event that there's a lift needed for whatever reason, like in this case here, we can do a modular aluminum ramp inside of garage and attach a lift system onto it. And we just installed one of these a couple weeks ago, and really, really liked the outcome. The member loved it as well. But it allows us to have quite a bit more modularity with what we do, especially if we're going to be incorporating a lift system or something into it as well. And if we are incorporating that lift system into it, lifts are not cheap, and trying to stick within that cap that I mentioned earlier on the home mod services. Whenever we can do aluminum like this and couple it with a lift system, we can stretch those dollars a little further, and also have some potential funds left over to utilize in other areas of the house for a bathroom remodel or a doorway widening or something like that. So here's an example too of another job that we did with an aluminum ramp. Just to keep in mind the capability and the modularity of these. Pretty much every home that we go out to, we're going to be able to find a way to put a ramp on it in some form or fashion to make it accessible. So in the areas, once we get, the aluminum ramp bolted onto the house, there's generally a threshold too that we've got to overcome at the same time. And this is an example of something that we usually include in with our aluminum or wooden wheelchair ramps out front that we can throw down. They are significantly heavier than they look. They're made of very, very dense rubber material, and they work great. And we can also size them down to exactly the exact height that we need. And then also in the homes that there's not an exact level threshold as compared to the ramp, we can also kind of customize them and make one size slightly higher than the other if needed to. But they're very durable and very easy to install. This is an example a minute ago, like I was explaining between the difference between medical equipment and home modification services of something that kind of falls under the medical equipment services, given that these are portable. So if you look, it's kind of accomplishing the same thing that this is, but this is something that easily can be folded up and taken inside of a vehicle, or utilized on more than one threshold if necessary to get the member inside the home. But this is a simple thing to add on to a bid that has a lot of uses, both in home and outside of home too. So with regard to stair lifts, these are the turnaround times on these stair lifts have kind of gone up as recently, primarily due to some acquisitions that are going on within the stair lift market of companies buying one another and acquiring one another, and then also just the chip shortage too affected this industry pretty hard. But straight stair lift is approximately, it's probably going to be pushing closer to the 6-week turnaround time from approval to completion, just due primarily to the material lead times. And then once you get into the curved stair lifts, it goes even further out than that. Curved stair lifts are closer to that 14-week turnaround time right now, and that's just true across the industry. We've talked to multiple providers of stair lifts, and they're all kind of that far out. So we can still do them, and and if you think one is needed, definitely reach out to us. We can talk you through that. But just know, just as far as setting expectations, just kind of having an awareness of how long it takes. You're going to be pushing out to probably the 14-week time frame or longer with the curved stair lifts, and a little bit less long, 6 weeks or so out for the straight stair lifts. The primary reason for that too is just the straight stair lifts. They don't have to do anything custom necessarily to them. They have the straight track material in stock. And then the curved stair lifts, obviously they're all custom, and so that takes even longer than the straight ones do. Ceiling lifts are another thing we do a lot of. These have the turnaround times are closer to probably the 5-week time frame right now, just due to some of the materials and things that we use for them becoming more available. Yeah, we can get these done pretty quickly. I need to update this specific slide actually. But what we like to look at, in addition to just a ceiling lift, it may be something where we use medical equipment in addition to a ceiling lift or in lieu of a ceiling lift, depending on the exact need. And this is something that the occupational therapy assessment will help us kind of determine. But we like to look at, and recommend generally trying to use a Hoyer lift if we can, for multiple reasons. But there are some instances in which a ceiling lift is going to be required or recommended specifically instead of a Hoyer lift. When it comes to vertical platform lifts, this is a picture of one we just did a couple weeks ago. Our turnaround times on these are pretty long as well, and they are also pretty expensive. Just due to in this case, we had to pour the concrete that this is sitting on as well, and then run dedicated electrical over to it. And then the actual equipment, the platform lift itself is pretty expensive. So there's generally a alternative that we can use, but in some homes, this one was a good example. There was no alternative, just due to the fact that those stair lifts were not a viable solution in this case, and just, kind of took a little bit longer to get this in than we anticipated. But generally, we're looking at about 4 to 7 weeks to get these done. And they are, in the instances that they're needed, and that a stair lift isn't going to be a good solution, these are a great solution. So on the medical equipment side, this is kind of a brief example. There's a lot of different types of medical equipment and supplies that could be used here. I wanted to highlight a couple of the really common ones that we get pretty often. The rockers, obviously, that's something that we get requested often. And then the beds by George is another really often requested item. Hospital beds is also, another example, but pretty much any type of medical equipment that you could consider. If you have questions on it, reach out to us. We can walk you through what's needed and provide feedback or maybe even alternatives as well. The other supplies that we get asked about pretty frequently are shower chairs and commode combos. So we do these, we sell these pretty often as well, and they're really easy to get a hold of, very customizable. So the left item there is a Riften HTS shower chair. It stands for Hygiene Toileting System. So it kind of encompasses a commode, shower chair, everything all at once. And then we can add in things like the seat belts, the head supports, the lateral supports. It's a very, very customizable piece of equipment. And then the roll-in, shower with a tilt and space option too. The center picture is another thing that we've provided from time to time. And these go really well and work very well in conjunction with the home modifications. So I think that is one thing as a provider that we try to do, is be just kind of a one-stop shop for people. So if you do have a need where you're not sure if it falls between the medical equipment or the home mod space, or if it's somewhere in between, and you're just needing a consultation, maybe even prior to an occupational therapy assessment, reach out to us and we can kind of walk you through, our recommendation from a high level. And then if we need, we can get an occupational therapist to kind of reach out and then, to provide more of an in-depth and specific assessment. But we really try to provide both sides of the service, from both the home modification component and then, filling any other gaps that are needed with the medical equipment too. And then, like I said a minute ago, the Hoyer lift, either electric or hydraulic, depending on the needs, is another great alternative, and kind of bridges the gaps between sometimes home modifications and medical equipment, or the ceiling track lift. So I know we kind of covered a lot of varying things, and there was a bunch of different rabbit holes we could have gone down, but I wanted to provide kind of a high level and then open it up for questions and answers, and we can do that here in a second. But first, on our website, thrivehomesllc.com, we have a contact page there. If you have any questions, or after the presentation today that maybe we didn't get to, or if something comes to mind down the road, feel free to reach out. Our phone number is on there, and our email address, as well as that contact form. We try to respond to everyone within the same day, so we'll try to have an answer to you pretty quickly. Again, thank you so much for the time and attentiveness, and then for just the ability for us to present today. And we're very grateful to be able to talk about what we can provide and the services we can provide, and hope that you took something away from it. Outside of everything we talked about today, I guess we'll turn it back over to you, Shelley, and see if there were any questions that came up in the chat.
That's great. Perfect. Thank you, Christian. And we do have a couple of questions in the chat, and one is specific to you, in regards to if you would provide that OT evaluation via telehealth outside of your service area.
Great question. Yes. The answer to that is yes. We are working on, and I need to meet with Jason to discuss this. I actually shot off an email to him yesterday, but we're working on providing the OT assessments statewide. And right now we will be doing that. We need to add, I think, and this is a separate conversation probably, Shelley, but we need to add our name to the provider list in those different regions, just so that they are aware that we can provide it. But as of right now, yes, we can provide them statewide.
And we had another question in regards to OT evaluations and the funding. And so I can go ahead and answer that. The OT evaluations for EAA are funded through that TC modifier, and that does come out of your overall EAA funds. If you feel that there needs to be an OT evaluation for something, for another service, such as, let's say, assistive technology or SME or something, where that that is not required, there is still some avenue to use that general OT service code in order to provide that service. So I'm not sure if I answered that entirely, but if you do have additional questions on that, please send those to me and I'll try to be more specific in my response. Let me take a quick look and see if we had anything else come in. Okay, I don't see any other questions, and I believe Kat has provided your email address through the chat as well. So if there's no other questions, we will go ahead and in this section of the Lunch and Learn, and we hope that this was information that was valuable to each of you. And as Christian said, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Christian, and we'll be sure to provide that clarification and those additional follow-ups. So we appreciate you taking the time to visit with us today, and we hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks again, everyone.